Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome, welcome. We are allowing a little bit more time for folks to join in. So, in the meantime, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat and we will start momentarily. All right. Thank you all so much. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. And welcome to the Black Mamas Matters Faithful Advocacy, Faith Communities, and the Pursuit of Black Maternal Health and Reproductive Justice webinar. My name is Zainab Denise Nyang, and I am the Black Maternal Regional Organizer at BMMA, and today's host as well. As a collaborative event between Heart, Sacred, the Village Auntie Institute, and our alliance partner, Sister Reach, we are looking forward to an empowering discussion on the importance of faith and policy in Black maternal health and reproductive justice with Black women experts and scholars in the field. We would also like to thank our sponsors and donors for Black Maternal Health Week because of their support that helps us to create these type of campaigns and activations. This allows us to work closely with internal and external partners to advance Black maternal health rights, justice domestically and globally. But first, before we get started, I would like to cover some logistical items. Everyone is currently muted and will stay muted during the call. Closed captioning is available to enable closed captioning, however, click on closed captioning on the bottom near your screen. But if you don't see it there, you should be able to find it when clicking more. At the end of our presentation, we will answer a couple of questions, so please utilize the Q&A box to submit any questions that may arise. The Black Mamas Matter Alliance, BMMA, is a national network of Black women-led organizations and multidisciplinary professionals whose work is deeply rooted in the reproductive justice and birth justice within the human rights framework to ensure that all Black mamas have the rights, respect, and resources to thrive before, during, and after pregnancy. BMMA functions as the premier Black maternal health professional organization centering the technical, training, and developmental needs of the global Black maternal, perinatal, and reproductive health workforce through the following goals and main work bucket areas: changing policy, cultivating research, advancing care, and shifting culture. Of particular note, we use the phrase Black mamas to include a range of birthing people, from cis women, trans folks, and gender nonconforming individuals that are of African descent across the diaspora. To those who care for and mother our families and our communities, whether they have given birth or not, we stand in solidarity with all Black mamas. Founded in 2018 by BMMA, Black Maternal Health Week intentionally takes place in April, which is recognized in the United States as National Minority Health Month. Additionally, we begin Black Maternal Health Week on April 11th annually to join dozens of global organizations in marking this day as an International Day for Maternal Health and Rights, an opportunity to advocate for the elimination of maternal mortality globally. For our webinar today, we will break up the discussion into 3 themes that will explore the intricate relationship between policy and faith practices. It is important to note that this is not an exhaustive list of themes, rather an introduction. To that effect, we ask for your patience as we thoroughly discuss these themes. The purpose of this webinar is to explore the historical implications, current situations, and potential solutions. Today's themes will cover toxic theology, the politicization of faith, and liberation theology. We are so excited to welcome Black women experts who work in the field of policy and faith and its intersections with Black maternal health and reproductive health rights and justice. First, we welcome Reverend Letitia James. She, they, affectionately known as Reverend Pleasure, is a Black queer femme womanist culture change agent, facilitator of healing spaces for queer, trans, BIPOC women and femmes, and also a writer. They serve as a co-director for organizational development at the Spiritual Alliance of Communities for Reproductive Dignity, Sacred, where they work to make reproductive justice a lived reality through liberating religious education and organizing people of faith. Letitia is ordained in the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries and is a healing-centered pleasure coach. Today, she will be joining us via webinar, but will not be able to join on video as well. Reverend Dr. Elise Salisbury is the Director of Programming at Sister Reach, a 501c3 grassroots and the only reproductive and sexual justice organization in Tennessee. She represents Sister Reach in the discussions that impact Black women, masculine presenting women, individuals, LGBTQ plus folks, marginalized and disenfranchised communities. Dr. Elise is a pastor of Remnant Community Outreach, formerly Agape Ministries, and overseer of inclusive and affirming ministries across the South. Sabreen Mohammed is the manager of health education and research at Heart, where she oversees women and adolescent girls in violence prevention and sexual health programs, as well as creating new public health initiatives for Muslim communities. Asia Thomas of the Village Auntie Institute, where the Village Auntie Institute provides a safe space where women and girls can begin to see themselves for who they are. Asia is also a certified birth doula and postpartum caregiver, also a newborn care specialist who offers childbirth classes and services as a breastfeeding peer partner. Asia has supported women internationally for over 15 years, attending hundreds of births and supporting over 1,000 families. And last but certainly not least, we will hear from Stephanie Aristide, BMMA's very own policy and advocacy associate. In her role, Stephanie leads BMMA's current policy and advocacy portfolio with a focus on the state of Georgia and other Southeastern stakeholders, including partner engagement. Additionally, she tracks state legislation and industry policies related to Black maternal and reproductive health. So starting off our discussion, we welcome Reverend Letitia and Reverend Dr. Elise to discuss our first theme, toxic theology and its impact on Black maternal health. Passing over to you, Reverend Letitia.
Thank you so much, Zainabu. Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Happy Black Maternal Health Week. I am so excited to be here with you all, and thank you for your grace with me not being on camera. So this first theme, when we're talking about toxic theology and its impact on Black maternal health and marginalization within Black and Brown communities, what do we mean? So when I say toxic theology, I mean any theology, any religious or spiritual system that enacts religious and spiritual violence. It also enacts emotional violence, mental violence, and can also it can also cause physical violence as well, depending on the situation. And so right now, what we are seeing within the US is an increase of toxic theology being used to enact violence as it relates to reproductive health, sexual health, and gender health, gender justice as well. On this slide, what you're seeing are three definitions of things that are leading into the particular toxic theology that is undergirding a lot of the political legislation that we are seeing. So the first being white supremacy, which we know to be a belief in which white people constitute a superior race and should therefore dominate society. Similar to that is that of Christian supremacy, which is a global ideology wherein Christianity is seen as the religion that should govern all global contexts and interests and is forcibly aligned with the interests of those who hold the most power. Oftentimes, what we are seeing with the increase in religious fundamentalism being brought into our political discourse is the collusion of white supremacy and Christian supremacy, right? So literally white Christian supremacy is a lot of what is fueling the legislation that we are seeing. Within the US, while white Christian supremacy is like the umbrella of what's happening, what's also operating is Christian nationalism, which is this theological movement and this belief that the US should be an inherently Christian nation, and that it is an inherently Christian nation. And where some of that comes from is this idea of freedom of religion becoming synonymous with Christian nationalism and the spreading of a particular type of Christianity throughout the US. We hear about how the quote unquote founders of this country were fleeing religious persecution as Protestants. And then they, in turn, what we know to be true, turned around and started to use their religion to oppress others and to eradicate religious pluralism in this country, right? In the so-called United States. We saw that with the transatlantic slave trade, with colonization, with the decimation of indigenous people on this land, where religion, particularly this brand of Christianity, was seen to be superior and held the authority over everything. And so when we have that as the backdrop, right, what we then get is the impact on our communities. And so in modern times, with Christian supremacy continuing to proliferate our communities, we see its infiltration into the Black church and the ways in which the Black church then in turn treats Black women, Black LGBTQ folks, right, and other marginalized communities, which continues to be an unfortunate phenomenon. And so particularly something that I grew up with in my own personal experience as somebody who was raised in the Pentecostal church. Pentecostalism does tend to be a more evangelical brand of Christianity, more fundamentalist, wherein I grew up in a lot of purity culture. And so these theologies, they oftentimes are rooted in a lot of biblical literism. They are rooted in patriarchy. They are rooted in, unfortunately, a lot of racial superiority ideologies around white supremacy that says that women are less than, that says that men are the head of the church, right? They equate men and patriarchy with God a lot of times. You always see God as a man in these contexts. You always see that God has authority, and so therefore men should also have authority over the home, over their wives, over their children, etc. And this is how we start to get justifications of violence against women, how we get justifications of reproductive oppression, because of all of these different kind of chain blocks linking together that say this is exactly the way that it should be. And particularly within the Black church, there's oftentimes the suppression of women's voices. We have varying denominations, fundamentalist denominations that silence women in the church, right? Don't think that there should be women pastors, for example. And the ways that a lot of this then impacts how it is that Black women in particular are able to access the care that they deserve and that they need is because we're infantilized. We're not seen as being able to be trusted or in control of our own bodies, right? This is where we get theology that links us to Eve and to the creation story and the fall of humanity and the blame for why certain things happen. And so when you have these theologies and you have people who then get into positions of power, oftentimes white men who are in these positions of power, who have these theologies, who are spreading them in their communities, they then also bring them into their political ideologies, right? They bring them into the Senate and into Congress. And then they're able to push certain legislation, like the legislation that we saw most recently in Alabama, for example, around embryos being declared human beings, right? Being declared children. And in that case, for those who may not be familiar, the way that that even came about was because there was an unfortunate incident at a hospital where couples who had used IVF to become pregnant, have children, they had healthy children, and they still had their embryos in the cryo freezer at this facility. There was a patient in this facility who unfortunately broke into the facility and went into the cryo, broke in, and was trying to remove the embryos. Because of the sub-zero temperatures, this person got hurt in the process and they dropped the vials, breaking the vials and destroying the embryos in the process. And so these families went to sue the hospital, right, for damages. And in suing the hospital for damages, one of the statutes that they tried to use was the unlawful harming of a minor. And originally at the state level, the court threw it out, but then they took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is where they said, you know, yes, that this family has a case. And this is how we got here. And so this is where we see a lot of like intersection of different things coming together, right? Of pro-life ideology, of people demeaning various families and various ways of creation of families. And then also this idea of who gets to determine how families get made, and who has bodily autonomy and who is able to determine, right, who has a right and an access to certain things. And all of this is being fueled by these toxic theologies that are at the intersection of Christian supremacy and Christian nationalism.
All right. Christian nationalists, also known as the imposters of Christianity, aim to do what they call, quote unquote, preserve America as a Christian nation. Christian nationalist is an act of white male dominance with no regard for those who are not white and no regard for care for the impact and harm they superimpose on women, children, and others. Christian nationalists attempt to usurp authority that not even God desires to manipulate, authority that includes choice, autonomy, and self-determination. Christian nationalism's impact historically has caused wars, and not wars because of people being denied necessities such as food, water, protection, and shelter, and not wars because of threats of violence from other nations, but wars to ensure that power, control, and abundance remain only within reach of white men. Christian nationalism history encompasses fear-mongering, making rape legal, slavery, forced breeding by Black women, murder, and all the things that most Christians should reject. They seek to subvert democracy, i.e., January the 6th, White House takeover. It refuses truth in education and refuses sexual health education. It denies access to healthcare choices. Christian nationalists seek to subdue those most vulnerable. The ideology of Christian nationalists are such as the man they call the father of modern gynecology, J. Marion Sims, will use scientific analysis or healthcare research on Black bodies to heal white bodies and use Black bodies to increase white abundance, including Black bodies to breastfeed white babies. Christian nationalism is harmful and antithetical of what Christianity and other religious beliefs should espouse. And most religious beliefs form from the do no harm premise. However, Christian nationalists know that using the Bible and it will cause those who are most harmed to consider their posture as right and God-given, and even to vote to self and community harm, cause community harm and demise because of said errant and uneducated theological postures or teachings. And I'll offer, as Reverend Letitia, being born and raised into the Christian faith or Christianity, it has offered things such as a young individual or teen girl gets pregnant, or a woman gets pregnant, and only that woman is brought before the church to apologize or to do what they call repent for that pregnancy, right? There is a focus mostly on the Black women and girls to be apologetic for their behavior and the outcome, and never acknowledges that there is a man or a young man involved in such occurrences. And here, Encyclopedia Britannica defines imperialism as the state policy, practice, or advocacy of extending power and dominion, especially through direct territorial acquisition or gaining political or economic control of other areas. Imperialism and colonialism use unprovoked, militaristic, economic, diplomatic, and cultural variances to extend their power over foreign nations. And examples of colonialism occurred when instances such as invasions of what is now known as America, Africa, and other countries. Colonialism, imperialism, and nationalism are interconnected tactics that have historically had insurmountable impact on countries to the point of no recovery. Extracting resources such as gold and other resources from Africa, using human trafficking and enslavement of Black bodies to build many nations, and gun violence and deceit to conquer indigenous people living in the quote unquote new world. These things, imperialism, colonialism, and nationalism, have historically touched, harmed, and changed the periphery of Western civilization. One concept empowers and emboldens the other. Spanish and other countries believed that their faiths were the only true faith. Their posture was that they must conquer so that those considered pagan, basically people with varying beliefs, would take on their beliefs. And in that, Christianity has been used as a tool to conquer countries by conquering people. After the initial crusades of Muslim people from control of Christian-dominated nations, historically, the crusader mentality evolved into strategy of expanding what was called the true faith into the Americas. Christopher Columbus and other colonizers evangelized or quote unquote saved souls while they sought to profit from countries they conquered. Over the many centuries, institutional religious oppression has been used. Religious discrimination in healthcare settings has been employed, and religion, in this case Christianity, has been used to justify slavery, creating systems of social stratification to determine the worth, wealth, or holiness, if you will, of individuals. In the 20th century, the Christian fundamentalists and evangelical movement embodied the likes of a Billy Graham, R.W. Schambach, Jimmy Swaggart, Jerry Falwell, and many others today who use Christianity's overreaching to employ and expand theological fascism and their desire for dominance.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Elise. Transitioning into the second theme, we will go into politicizing faith and its impact on Black maternal health and reproductive justice. This offers a glimpse of where we are now. Continuing with Reverend Dr. Elise from Sister Reach.
Alrighty. So reproductive justice is a framework designed by 12 Black women in 1995 to center the needs of Black people through an intersectional methodology. The framework is grounded in Black feminist theory and human rights, and central to reproductive justice theory is the universal human right to dignity, self-determination, and autonomy. In much the same way that liberation theology situates the poor and dispossessed, reproductive justice centers the people whose liberty has been violated and whose social and economic well-being and culture has been deliberately ignored. Reproductive justice seeks to liberate and emancipate vulnerable populations from all forms of reproductive and sexual oppression. It was and is their desire to employ methods that truly answer foundational causes of poverty, maternal morbidity, and maternal and infant mortality, as well as focus on what abundance is for the individual, as well as communities who desire it. The framework's goal is inclusivity, choice, and abundance for all. However, the overreach of Christianity through Christian nationalism and Christian nationalists and fundamentalists has had devastating impacts on Black people and vulnerable populations, and it hinders progress. Today, this looks like Christian nationalists and/or extremist agenda ignoring the science of public health and ethical medical practices for intervention and prevention. The overturn of Roe v. Wade is only the beginning of racist, sexist, and anti-human rights attempts to force white births while employing population control over births of Black babies. In Tennessee specifically, this looks like government Haslam saying no to Sex Week that colleges were initiating for education and preventive purposes. It impacted the Saving Ourselves Symposium, which centered HIV education, prevention, and intervention. And in this symposium, they weren't able to talk about safe sex kits. This was back in 2014 or 2015, and so this is not new. In Tennessee, it also looks like mandating abstinence-based or abstinence-only sex education as a religious or moral standard while prohibiting comprehensive reproductive and sexual health education access. It looks like transgender athlete bills, transgender bathroom bills, anti-LGBT clergy bills, anti-LGBT marriage bills. It also looks like advocating for purity pledges while ignoring the realities of puberty and how it manifests in the lives of young people, while failing to ensure that men and boys learn about consistent and other healthy relationship tools that will quell instances of sexual violence. It looks like prohibiting LGBTQIA plus people from LGBTQIA plus centered sex health education or honoring pronouns or even gender identity. It looks like criminalizing people who will take minors across state lines seeking abortion, regardless of the premise of that pregnancy. In Tennessee, it also looks like doctors using their religious beliefs to limit services offered to individuals, which ultimately race can be used if they're using the Bible. Since the beginning of this country, there's been religious-based healthcare, and just about every hospital is religious-based or religious ran. Opportunities for discrimination more so over the last 10 years, where we've seen before Obama administration and an uptick due to post Obama administration. The Affordable Health Care Act was meant to expand care while hospitals closed and religious institutions such as the Vatican purchased those hospitals. Also, Sister Reach was involved in two research projects, one with Community Catalyst and another with Catholics for Choice, LGBT Task Force, and NARAL, that analyzed religious attitudes towards medical services and healthcare that individuals requested. The reality that we exist in is that the majority of people surveyed across religious and spiritual backgrounds agreed that everyone should have choice and basically that doctors should do the job they signed up for. However, again, religious oppression by overreaching of religious-based systems refuse care. Christian-owned clinics house themselves in Black communities to evangelize people as they seek care, whether dental or other forms of medical care. And again, in Tennessee, there are several anti-LGBT bills, several anti-abortion bills being sponsored. And most of these, many of these are coming from Christian nationalists, those who are seated. And so last but not least, the one of the things that there was an attempt for over the past couple of years is that the Bible becoming a state book. And so these are just some of the ways in which politicizing Christianity has impact on us, and not just here in Tennessee, but the things that you all see happening in Tennessee are things that other states take on once they realize that it in fact has succeeded in terms of sponsoring and the bill becoming a policy process here. So basically things that you all see happening in Tennessee are at some point or another on its way to other states.
So before getting into current policy impacts, I want to give a timeline and examples of faith-based groups that have historically been supportive of reproductive health and rights. So these groups have done many things like help pay for reproductive care. Clergy have had blessed health clinics, and churches have hosted abortion support groups. It doesn't remove any of the harm they have done in other areas, but we just wanted to show that as well. And starting in 1931, the Federal Council of Churches of Christ voted to support birth control for married couples. That's something that is unheard of, as contraception was a controversial topic, still is, and for as the narrative as marriage was ordained for reproduction. And then it continues with the United Church of Christ, American Baptist Convention, the United Methodist Church, and many, many more churches. They began to issue statements in support of legal abortion, and the American Baptist Convention writing in their resolution stating, because Christ calls us to affirm the freedom of persons and the sanctity of life, we recognize that abortion should be a matter of responsible personal decision. They continued furthering, encouraging churches to study, research, and develop understanding of the populace when it comes down to different views. So we continued throughout the 1960s, groups like the National Council of Churches, which represented 39 million Christians, agreed in condemning abortion or any method which destroyed human life, except when the health or life of the mother is at stake, and leaves the responsibility to the mother in relation to family planning if the welfare and social situation endangers the mother and the child. So again, these are examples of faith-based group that may not support everything due to their religious beliefs, but they weren't going out of their ways to block those who needed reproductive health care. And then we had groups like the Clergy Consultation Service, which grew active in 25 states. This was a group of clergy from a wide range of denominations, from Presbyterian Church, United Methodist, Reformed Judaism, and others who helped people seek abortions, even though abortion was illegal. The service would help young women in need of abortion connect to safe, reputable clinics. They offer travel, counsel, and spiritual support as well. And so the legacy of the Clergy Consultation Service lives in the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, which is an active multi-faith group rooted in reproductive justice values and anti-racist movement for reproductive freedom. So the support continued through legislation. When the Southern Baptist Convention issued a resolution that would allow the possibility of abortion under conditions such as sexual assault, incest, severe fetal deformity, and the evidence of damage to the emotional, mental, and physical health of the mother. Even with these growing faith-based groups, racism and discrimination always has its way of intruding itself. And we've heard about the Christian supremacy. And this time it came through the religious right group of white evangelicals that originally organized in defense of racial segregation, but masked their stance as wanting to end abortion. So founders of the religious right group started with people like Bob Jones Jr., who argued that racial segregation was mandated in the Bible and in his school. And from there, they thought that the government had no right to tell them how to run their businesses until the Civil Rights Act changed that. So this group was able to gain influence, gain power through opposed abortion access, regulating clinics, and fighting public funding for abortion care. So groups like the religious right were able to use religious liberty as a strategy to stand in their discrimination and racism. Religious liberty is the Constitution's First Amendment, defending the free exercise of religion without the interference of the government. We see that, unfortunately, this amendment doesn't pan out the way that it should, as we have folks in high positions that are policymakers, decision makers, employers, and providers that are operating out of their religious values and preventing those of marginalized communities that are listed here from human basic rights, reproductive health, healthcare, and infertility coverage. And this speaks to what Reverend Letitia spoke on earlier. So religious liberty is exploited to deny access to others. And we see that in different scenarios, like in the 1800s, when the American Medical Association sought greater control over obstetrics and gynecology, where they were pushing out midwives and traditional practices. And those early regulation efforts were in part driven by religious doctors stating they were concerned with the morality and safety of abortion. But those regulations didn't target abortion. They opposed abortion and contraception on the grounds that they promoted promiscuity rather than arguing the sanctity of an unborn life. So we are seeing it today within the healthcare system. People are regularly refused reproductive health care because they are patients of religious hospitals, and those hospitals are declining to provide sterilization, infertility treatments, abortion, and even employers that work for these religious hospitals, they won't cover abortion or contraceptives in their insurance plans. And then so Reverend Elise also spoke on a lot of different examples, but just giving more background of, we see Hobby Lobby in 2014, where the company refused and still refuses to cover employee birth control on the basis that some corporations can have sincerely held religious beliefs, and that was upheld and protected because of the Religious Freedom Act of 1993, where again, they were denying their employees access to birth control coverage. And then we've also seen it within the administration with HHS in 2017, where they exempted employees who claimed a religious or moral objection to birth control did not have to cover it for their employees. So we see how this impacts every social and structural area in one's life. So next, I want to discuss our current legislation. As we know, Roe v. Wade was overturned, and we've been seeing the domino effect of this decision. And I want to make it clear, it's not just about abortion. It's about the fundamental right to bodily autonomy. When we're talking about reproductive health, it's about having the access to full spectrum maternal, sexual, and reproductive health care. So we've seen the impact with abortion bans on birthing people and regulations with abortion providers. We're seeing these crisis pregnancy clinics taking over every day. They're growing every single day. And these centers are unregulated. They're non-medical organizations that misinform pregnant people and provide substandard services operating off of the First Amendment rights. Because of their religious ideology, it takes priority at these centers. So the women who are coming in that are seeking care, not receiving comprehensive, accurate, evidence-based clinical services, and important information about the available options that they have. So they're getting duped every single time they go in there. We've also seen the attacks on gender affirming care. Just this past year, hundreds of bills have been introduced that target transgender and non-binary youth who needed access to age-appropriate medical care. At the height of the legislative session, more than half of all trans youth were living in a state where a gender-affirming care ban had been introduced. 37 states in the US have introduced over 140 bills to restrict gender-affirming healthcare for trans and gender-expansive people just in 2023. So a lot of these states are following those same steps, where places like Oklahoma, Texas, and South Carolina, they've considered banning care for transgender people up to the age of 26. And we're also seeing it in states like Alabama that are placing restrictions on IVF treatments. So we're seeing all of these restrictions and oppression by religious beliefs. Where do we go from here? We say reproductive freedom is religious freedom. Part of the First Amendment includes two complementary protections: freedom of religion and freedom from religion. So on this slide, you'll see that I've listed some federal and state legislation that supports reproductive health rights and justice. And I want to say I am speaking to US policies, as we'll hear more from Sabrine, but know that these issues transfer globally. I'm speaking specifically to stop the maternal and reproductive health genocide happening in countries like mine, Haiti, where my family is from, Palestine, Congo, and Sudan. And so we have these legislations where it's the Do No Harm Act that makes it clear that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act would not apply in certain circumstances, whereas religious exemption could cause harm to others. That includes non-discrimination laws and access to healthcare. We talk about supporting the Black Maternal Health Momnibus Act, working to end preventable maternal mortality, severe maternal morbidity, and maternal health disparities in the United States. And then at the state level, we have legislation like the Reproductive Freedom Act in Georgia that's providing protections for reproductive freedom into Georgia law. So we need to advocate and reach out to our legislators to get behind these bills that will allow all groups their reproductive rights.
As we're looking at the intersection of politics, religion, and how it really impacts American Muslims, I really want to speak to the reproductive seeking behavior of American Muslims. And what we see often is that political leaders in this country exploit Islamophobic sentiments that targets Muslims here in the US and Muslim majority countries in the name of national security and in the name of protecting American citizens from perceived Muslim threats. These politicians advocate for restrictive measures and policies that impacts Black and brown bodies in this country, but globally as well. And when we're thinking about such policies, I really want to highlight a few of them, thinking about how immigration policies such as the ban on Muslims, restricting Muslim majority countries, individuals from Muslim majority countries entering this country, and refusing refugees from Muslim majority countries, thinking about surveillance measures and counterterrorism strategies that has been utilized against Muslim bodies in this country and abroad. And how that really disproportionately targets Black and brown Muslim communities. And that has direct impact to what we're seeing, what we're experiencing in majority Black and brown Muslim communities, to the lack of access to basic reproductive health measures in this country. I really want to speak a little bit on the gendered Islamophobia aspect of how politics and faith and religion all intersect when it comes to Muslims in the US. So gender Islamophobia consists of the ways that the state utilizes gender forms of violence to oppress, monitor, punish, mime, or control Muslim bodies. This includes all gendered forms of violence that are inflicted on Muslim bodies. This includes the use of state reproductive coercion, reproductive violence, sexual violence, and thinking about gendered Islamophobia specifically, it has a lot of impacts on the reproductive health and rights within the Muslim American communities. When we're looking at how discriminatory policies and attitudes limits Muslim bodies from accessing essential reproductive health services. This includes access to basic sexual health education, access to good quality maternal health care, good quality maternal and child health care, and family planning services. For instance, we see that politicians, again, exploit Islamophobic sentiments to justify these restrictions on our reproductive rights and our reproductive freedoms, such as imposing barriers to contraceptive, barriers to abortion services that Stephanie has talked about. And this has direct impact to Muslim women and femmes, and specifically when we're looking at the margins, those Muslims who are living within the class and race margins. Additionally, I want to bring that Islamophobic discriminatory policies really hinder our efforts as within the Muslim American community in addressing gender-based violence and coercion within Muslim communities, specifically due to the fear of the backlash from Islamophobic policies and Islamophobic sentiments. So this really intervenes with our access to interventions that a lot of Muslim survivors need, specifically Muslim survivors who identify as Black and Brown and queer, due to the fear of, facing Islamophobic backlash and not having access to escape their abusive situations. When we're looking at the intersection of, how faith, politics, and reproductive rights in the US impacts Muslim bodies, we see that Muslims often really have to navigate this landscape that extremely harmful when it comes to seeking reproductive health and making decisions that fully aligns with their individual desires and aligns with how they practice their faith. So we often see that political ideologies around abortion that often leans more conservative and often leans more from a white supremacist ideology is infiltrating Muslim communities, especially when we look at the Islamic faith. We find that Muslims, depending on the school of thoughts that you adhere to, abortion can be very permissible and can be fully a decision that an individual makes between themselves, their families, their doctor, their healthcare team. But we find that because of the infiltration of white supremacist policies and white supremacist-led Christian hegemonies in our spaces, often Muslims are not having access to these fundamental religious rights and freedoms that we should all exercise. I really want to bring in the idea of the intersectional challenges that a lot of Muslims are experiencing when seeking reproductive health. We often find that Muslim women, femmes, gender nonconforming folks are experiencing the highest rates of religious discrimination, are experiencing the highest rates of gender-based violence in our communities, which again goes back to how they're seen in the larger society as those who are living in the margins and not having access to to experience the reproductive freedoms that white cis Christian folks get to experience in this country, and dominating the spaces, which doesn't give us opportunities as Muslims who experience those intersections to fully exercise our freedoms and express our desire to have a really complete sexual and reproductive lives. Based on what Stephanie mentioned, I really want to bring, as part of like having this conversation and awareness about reproductive oppression happening in this country, I want to point out that direct domestic reproductive policies that impact Black and Brown and Indigenous bodies here in the US, it's directly linked to global issues that we are witnessing at the moment. So these targeted policies are targeted to Black and Brown bodies, and we're watching the ongoing genocide in Gaza, and the reproductive genocide, which refers to the policies, discourse, practices that restrict, target, and diminish life-giving capacities, access to short and long-term healthcare, life chances of communities that were made vulnerable by systemic violence, mostly oppression and occupation. So with that definition, I really want to draw a comparison between what's being experienced here directly in the US and what Black and Brown and Indigenous bodies have to go through to simply just have access to reproductive health care, and how that, the conservative right-wing Christian nationalist movement here and the policies that they're enacting is directly linked to what we're seeing globally. The ratio might not be 1-to-1, right? But I just want to showcase that the current disregard to reproductive rights and the reproductive oppression of Black and Brown and Indigenous bodies here, and how often we are militarized just for simply seeking basic healthcare, impacts what we see globally, especially what we're seeing in Gaza, Sudan, Haiti, and Congo. In a lot of cases, the limited access to reproductive healthcare due to the violence and displacement is directly linked to the higher numbers of maternal mortality that we're seeing it globally, and what we're seeing it here in the States, and the lack to basic access to family planning and support for pregnant women. Additionally, I really want to leave all of you with this, that the US government plays an important role in the international reproductive health policies. For example, the Mexico City policy, which is often known as the Global Gag Rule, prohibits foreign organizations that receive the US global health reproductive assistance from providing or even having conversations about family planning and specifically abortion services globally. So this really kind of shows you how the US, similar to the policies that we're seeing here, are being enacted abroad based on the US Global Health Fund. So restricting organizations from even having conversations with the individuals that they serve globally, it's a big, it's a big problem, which kind of, again, talks about how, showcases how policy, when we restrict access to reproductive health care, it really exacerbates what we're seeing and witnessing on the grounds and globally.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Elise, Stephanie, and Sabrine, for your powerful presentations. Again, as a reminder, we'll be answering a few questions at the end as time permits, so please utilize the Q&A box at the bottom to submit your questions. And last but not least, for our last theme, we will explore liberation theology, using faith as a tool of resistance, intimacy, community empowerment, and engagement. This offers us an opportunity to explore the ways faith communities can be a place of resistance and empowerment. Starting with Reverend Letitia of Sacred.
Hello again, everyone. I just want to thank my panelists for so profoundly outlining what it is that we're up against, right? When things like Christian supremacy and Christian nationalism get to grow unchecked, both within the US context and globally. And so it can be really daunting and overwhelming as somebody who's been in this work, working at the intersection of faith and reproductive justice for all of my career. It can at times feel somewhat hopeless when you see the rising attacks and when you see Christian supremacy and Christian nationalism feeling like it's taking more and more of a stronghold. But just like those of us on this panel, there are many of us who are fighting back in various ways. And so I'm really happy to talk about some of the work that I'm doing at Sacred, that we're doing as an organization within that regard. So the mission of Sacred is to create and equip a network of spiritual communities with liberative religious education and practices that shift our culture to advance reproductive justice. We do this in a few ways. One of the ways is through our national gathering, the Sacred Gathering, which is actually taking place in a couple of weeks in New Orleans from May 7th through the 9th. We just extended registration. So if you're interested in joining us, you can still register. It's not too late. But one of the reasons why we have the Sacred Gathering is to be able to bring together people who are working at the intersection of faith and reproductive justice, who want to engage in the process of education, unlearning, reflection, and public commitment to reproductive dignity. We are also doing this through our Sacred Curriculum, which is a 7-session curriculum wherein we ground in liberation theology, womanist theology, and the reproductive justice framework. We do this through a train the trainer model. So far, we have trained over 400 facilitators from 225 congregations, 38 states, and 30 denominations and religious traditions. And we are working on addenda every day to be able to expand the curriculum to different religious traditions. And we're grateful to have Heart as one of our partners in this work as well. So far, we have 3 sacred congregations that have been designated, and the designation process is as follows. So we start with dialogue, right? One of the things that came up earlier that Stephanie spoke about is the fact that the religious right has not always dominated the discourse around religion and reproductive access. That pre-Roe, we had communities of faith who were supportive of reproductive access, of abortion care, and more. And so part of our curriculum is helping people to unlearn this dominant narrative that the religious right has created, that they are the end-all, be-all authority when it comes to religion and reproduction and bodily autonomy. We teach folks about the history of how the religious right even got interested in oppressing abortion, right? And so we talk a lot about racial justice, and we do that alongside congregational values because it's imperative for communities of faith, particularly Christian communities, to understand that the narrative around Christianity being morally opposed to abortion actually came about because the religious right lost the fight over segregation. They were against desegregation. They were against integration of schools. And when they lost that fight, they realized that they needed a new mission to galvanize their party behind, right? To kind of lick their wounds in a way. And so as a way for them to feel better about themselves and to find a new thing for them to pick up and fight for, abortion became that thing. And they didn't actually start really organizing around it until 1979, 6 years after Roe. And so that's something that we really make sure that congregations and communities of faith understand in our curriculum. So then we move on to the theology, making sure that they are adopting healthy theology, again, theology rooted in liberation practices. We teach about womanist and feminist theologies. We make sure that congregations are committed to decentering patriarchal narratives within their spiritual spaces and making sure that their values and their principles align with the reproductive justice framework. From there, congregations are also equipped with tools around compassionate care. So that's spiritual care and support for all people who are seeking reproductive access, as well as gender affirming care and other needs. once they go through the curriculum as a congregation, they can decide to vote to become designated as a sacred congregation. From there, they're making commitments to living out what it is that they've now been equipped to do. So whether that's pastoral and community care within their space, whether that's getting involved in political and community action work with local organizations, whether that's incorporating things into their worship, into sermons, or other types of programming that they might come up with on their own, all of those things are possible. And one of the things, for example, that they might get involved in is Sacred is a part of a network of faith-based organizations who are actually renewing the clergy consultation service. So I know you've heard Stephanie talk about it earlier, that it started in 1967 with Protestant, Reformed Judaism, and Catholic priests. And those of us who understand why it was important then and why it's still important now have gotten together to renew the clergy consultation service. And so that's something that spiritual communities who are interested in continuing to fight for this work and continuing to fight for access and autonomy can get involved in. And then there's an accountability loop. And so we're checking in with congregations to make sure that they stay committed to their education, that they stay committed to the unlearning. Colonized Christianity, the indoctrination did not happen overnight. And so the unlearning is not going to take place overnight. And we know that this is very, very deep work that is going to take a lot of organizing and a lot of care, and which is why we ask congregations to commit to a redesignation process every 3 years. But we know that this is just a part of how it is that we're going to continue to create courageous communities and conversations so that we can shift the narrative and so that we can really reclaim the culture.
Reclaiming ancestral community of care and what that looks like in a digital space. We as a people have always known how to pull together in the hardest times with little to nothing. We knew how to conjure up things in order to get what it is that we needed. So in a time where inflation is here and things are expensive or hard to get access to, we have to go back to what our foremothers have done, and that's community and care. You can look at something from years ago that is still done today, such as the women in the South. They would get together and they would get a box, and for the pregnant mom, they would start little by little adding things to that box until it was time for her to deliver, and then she had everything she needed. And today that looks like community baby showers, right? And coming together. But what do you do when you don't have that type of community around you, or you don't have access, or you are from afar? Well, that's what brings us to digital spaces. Digital spaces in modern day time is a form of a hush harbor, offering women virtual and sacred spaces for them to gather, regardless of where they are geographically, racial, cultural, and faith boundaries. And these online communities, like the Village Auntie Institute, women can share their experiences and find empowerment, and regardless of distance, it seems to dissolve once women come together from diverse backgrounds and come to support one another and challenge the social norms. These digital hush harbors provide refuge for women to reclaim agency, natural well-being, and advocate for justice in all forms, very real time and tangible ways. Creating these silent spaces protects women in so many different ways from being judged or criticized, and most of all, being discouraged from the choices that they choose to make. They're able to connect with women who have like minds and different ideas. All of us experienced COVID. It left so many people feeling abandoned. It left people feeling disconnected, and digital spaces changed that. We were able to connect again, and in an even better way for people who dealt with certain things, such as being an introvert or being too shy or just not knowing how to show up physically. This digital space was able to change that for them. What does ancestral community care look like? African ancestral community care for birthing women were characterized by rich traditional collective and support and spiritual reverence for the birthing process. In many African cultures, women received extensive support from females, relatives, midwives, and elders. Today, we have doulas who show up in that way. For women who don't have that type of access, once again, you have doulas in the virtual way, you have doulas in your community, and so on and so forth. For instance, in the Yoruba culture, Nigeria, you had traditional birth attendants who played a critical role in assisting women during her labor and delivery, offering herbal remedies and spiritual guidance. Similar, you had the Akan people of Ghana. Birthing was viewed as a community event where women gathered and offered assistance, prayers, and encouraged the laboring mother. Today, we have doulas and midwives who offer that same support. Okay. So, women-led spaces, the Village Auntie Institute. We are 80K across social media, 1,500 active students yearly, in 86 countries represented, and 11 languages spoken, and still growing. This is a women-led space filled with professionals, layperson for reproductive, mental, public, and behavioral health resources embedded within the community.
As part of the interfaith reproductive justice movement, what we wanted to offer from our organization is really making sure that we're embedding our Islamic values into the work that we're doing. So part of, a lot of the work that we do within the reproductive justice space from an Islamic perspective is helping in creating a community narrative change and making the case that reproductive justice framework and principles are compatible with our faith tradition and it's compatible with our Islamic values. So HEART is one of the only Muslim organizations in the repro justice space that bring these values to provide education. We provide analysis on how the restrictive reproductive policies that we're experiencing here in the US fundamentally contradict with our constitutional religious freedoms and fundamentally contradict with Islamic values and Islamic principles as well. So we have 7 of these values that have been outlined, but I just wanted to share 3 of them. So the first one is Khilafa, the Arabic word for moral agency. And this looks at how each one of us has the free will to make decisions that fully align with our reproductive and sexual choices and our reproductive and sexual lives. So this looks at decisions that I make with my healthcare provider around family planning. What does that look like? Contraceptives, abortion access. So this looks at our moral agency our agency as individuals to seek those services. The second value that I wanted to bring into the space is rahma, which means compassion in English. This looks at how we help each other in providing tools to respond to impacted individuals within our community with compassion and care, specifically individuals that are experiencing reproductive trauma and reproductive oppression. So similar to what we're witnessing globally, right, with Gaza, Sudan, Haiti, those individuals who are experiencing reproductive traumas and reproductive oppression, from our, faith in reproductive justice, we really want to figure out ways to respond with compassion and make sure that wherever we're responding with aligns with their values and decision-making processes. The last value that I wanted to highlight is huruma. It's sacred inviolability, which looks at how each individual person or individual body is sacred being, and any harm that is committed against your sacredness is an injustice. So this looks at how, again, restrictive access to abortion, restrictive access to healthcare in general is an injustice that no individual should be experiencing. Again, when we're looking at all these values, really what we want to uplift, that reproductive violence, reproductive oppression eliminates our access to our reproductive health and sexual outcomes, and eliminates our religious freedom as Muslims in this country.
And so with Sister Reach reclaiming the narrative of policy and faith, for us in our work, it looks like Black women and Black people research in hospitals that we choose, their policies and position, as well as doctors' positions for care. And for those unable to research, reaching out to educate them on these same hospitals and their policies and ways that they're being impacted or would be impacted. It looks like seeking care from providers who work from a harm reduction, inclusive, and cultural humility perspective. Also, as mentioned, using doulas and midwives during the pregnancy and birthing experience for those who choose to or those who would like to. It looks like we considering or creating life-saving institutions that do not center and superimpose their religious beliefs when serving the community or patients. It also looks like patient-centered care and healing through the framework of reproductive justice itself, which includes respecting choice of others to birth and those who choose not to, providing safe and healthy environments with necessary social supports for everyone based on their individual choice. It looks like people's ability to parent the children they have, allowing people to express their sexuality and spirituality without fear or shame. It's allowing people to have bodily autonomy without any form of reproductive oppression, and allowing every individual quality of life before and beyond their ability to give birth. It looks like intentional inclusivity and diversity. So some of the ways that Sister Reach actualizes this is every year, for one, we go to the Capitol here in Tennessee and Nashville for our Black folks down the hill, where we go and we also take folks in the community to speak face to face with legislators about sponsored legislation that would impact the community. It looks like voter engagement, education, and mobilization. Other ways that we espouse this is through our faith and advocacy training and education modules, where we travel across the country to train those who desire to work in and with faith communities from an interfaith and spiritual perspective, what it looks like, as well as how to serve with culture humility. I personally call this training us using the master's tool to dismantle the master's house. And basically correctly exegeting biblical and religious and non-religious texts to encourage spiritual and religious freedoms, as was most religions do no harm and original intent. Sister Reach offers reproductive justice training for those who desire to know about or take a deeper dive into the framework and how to apply it to their work, regardless of the entity or type of entity or institution. Monthly, we host the Social Justice Preacher Series on Facebook, where we invite the interfaith and spiritual community leaders and activists to speak on issues that are currently impacting us in our communities and the world. Faith Advocacy and Religious Symposium is our world-class assembly where we discuss important issues that impact our communities, answer questions. We shine light on advocacy work. Some of the themes that we focus on are criminal justice reform, healthcare issues that are impacting the Black church, voter education, religious freedom, racial justice, LGBTQIA justice, and reproductive and sexual justice. And again, we're an organization that is in the community and on the ground as Black women, also serving the community with several programs that we offer here at Sister Reach.
So I want to thank all the panelists for your amazing expertise and knowledge. And so we always want to continue this momentum and give our attendees some actionable steps on what they can do as call to action. So we say to review BMMA's policy agenda, which is created in partnership with our alliance. In this agenda, we provide policy recommendations at all levels. And just giving one, we talk about strengthening and enforcing healthcare, non-discrimination protection for all Black women and birthing people, those across the sexual orientation, gender identity, immigration status, religion, and the whole spectrum. We also encourage you all to read the In Our Own Voice Reproductive Justice agenda that Dr. Reverend Elise mentioned, which is grounded in the human rights framework that provide proactive policy solutions that addresses all intersections. We ask folks to get engaged, be part of your community, engage in discussions that support and that supports community and provides culture shift. We also encourage you all to network, have conversations that you haven't had before. Let this be a time for you to learn and be involved in faith-based communities that without causing any additional harm. So always be aware of what you're asking, what you're saying, and just always be ready to be open. And then we talk about implementing it and finding and reaching out to your local community midwife and doula that understands your background, your culture, where they can provide you that service with those understandings. And then we talk about working and collaborating with organizations that are doing policy work to further understand policies for awareness and impact. So that's kind of what BMMA did today. We gathered our internal and external partners so that we can provide you all with this knowledge and policies that are happening now.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for bringing us in and calling us to action. Luckily, we have time for about 1 to 2 questions. So I'm calling all of our panelists to join us in responding to these questions if you see it available. The first question reads, how do you use what we learned today to better understand what's happening globally, i.e. Gaza, Sudan, Haiti, Tigray, the Congo, etc.?
I can start. I think when it comes to understanding how the US is connected to everything, all the genocides in the world, I think really investigating our, I'm not gonna say, I don't think a lot of us here are complicit, but just investigating our silence and seeing how we can speak up more and in terms of challenging those who are representing us, because, you know, our voices is the reason why they're sitting in their cushiony, nice offices. So investigating why they're supporting certain policies here that impacts Black and brown bodies here, and how that transitions and translates to the way that it's impacting the global South and global Black and brown bodies. I would also encourage everyone here to really reach out to organizations that are doing work in certain communities, in those communities specifically. I can name the Palestinian feminist collectives who actually issued a reproductive genocide, and the definition that I used in this presentation today is from their report, which, talks in depth about what's going on in Gaza and in general what has been going on in the past 75 years is a reproductive genocide. I encourage everyone here to also connect the dots when it comes to how our policies and how religious restrictions here that are fueled by white supremacist understandings of Christianity really puts us at disadvantage, specifically those who do not identify as Christians, but also Christians who do not identify with those teachings.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. I understand Heart does a lot of work in this intersection, so we really appreciate you lending your expertise and just overall ideologies and knowledge on this matter. Perhaps for the next question, we can invite some of our other panelists as well. So our last question, which is kind of leaving everybody or bidding everybody adieu with some encouraging words. So what encouraging words or steps do you have for folks that are looking for faith-based communities like yourselves? Where can they start looking for these organizations?
I'll go. I'll offer encouraging words to stand strong. Also, equally to rest Black women. It is something that we don't have the liberty of, but that we should take where it's possible. And I know that's easy to say and easy to think about and even easy to plan, because there's always a fire, right, going on about an issue in the community and or among us or among our family members or ourselves. And we have to rest. So I'll say that as encouragement. I'll also say that I think many of us that are here doing the presentation use us as you will as folks to connect with, and we can connect you to people who are doing the work in our areas, in our communities across the country. Reproductive justice is such an intersectional framework where no organization can do all of the work from even one perspective, right? Because we're impacted in so many ways. And so offering our organization, Sister Reach, as one of the organizations that are here, trust me, is going to make the work easier. There are other reproductive justice organizations across the country who are doing amazing work, who are doing the hard work. So I'll stop there and just say, first, it is okay to reach out to us, and where we're not able to assist, we can connect you with those in your state or even communities or areas of service or work of justice. We can connect you with them.
Hi, everyone. This is Reverend Letitia, definitely echoing everything that Reverend Dr. Illy said. Please feel free to reach out. I don't know if our emails are going to be shared, but I'm happy to talk to folks who are looking to get connected with other organizations. But what I would also say in terms of like where to start is start with yourself, right? So if anything that came up today around Christian supremacy, Christian nationalism, right, colonized Christianity resonated with you, and if you're like, wow, I was raised in that, or wow, that was something that really impacted me, and I see how, it took me a while to unlearn, think about that unlearning process and think about like what that might mean for other people as well, that if you're afraid to start, other people are probably afraid to start too. If you're like, oh, I didn't go to seminary or I didn't go to school for this, I don't really know how to talk about this stuff, none of that matters, right? We are all deeply steeped in this. We all swim in the waters of this country that has been founded on Christian supremacy and founded on this indoctrination. And so start with, your own journey and your own unlearning with grace and with gentleness, because it's not easy. There are times, or even myself as a person who did go to school for this, who did study this, I still struggle with certain things. I still find myself coming up against the indoctrination where I have to remind myself, like, oh, wow, I don't even believe that. But here I am, right, still having to unearth it and take it out of my psyche. It is yes, Reverend Dr. Elise, it is a lifetime learning, right? It is a lifetime unlearning and relearning. So I would say start with yourself. I do want to give a brief shout out, because Asia talked about online spaces and the Village Auntie. I do want to give a brief shout out to the Unfit Christian community. So if you are on Facebook, I would find Unfit Christian Congregation, which was started by D. Danielle Thomas, or Pastor Danny, as we call her affectionately. And it is a space that centers Black folks who are decolonizing Christianity, right? Who do not want to continue this proliferation of a toxic theology, right? That supports dominion and domination and eradication of pluralism and all of these things. That definitely eliminates purity culture, right? So I would start there. Also, shout out to Reverend Lavon Briggs, who does the Proverbial Experience. I think she just brought it back on Instagram, but also Reverend Dr. Melva Sampson, who was mentioned in Asia's portion, who does the Pink Robe Chronicles. These are all womanist liberation, Black women theologians who are doing this work, right? Who are doing exactly this, because we know firsthand how toxic and how violent these theologies have been just to our well-being and our flourishing and living in the world. And I would be remiss, it is April, it is also Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And so I really do want to just name, as somebody who works with survivors and who is a survivor, the intersection of the ways that these theologies impact both Black maternal health and impact us as survivors, because I know so many survivors who stayed silent because of toxic messages they received, particularly within the church and within their spiritual communities. Both in Black Christian communities and Black Muslim communities. And so knowing, right, like Reverend Dr. Lee said, reproductive justice is so intersectional. There are so many different ways that you can get involved and do things. And it really starts internally with that unearthing and within your communities that you're already a part of.
Thank you, Reverend Letitia and Reverend Dr. Elise. Just want to see if our other panelists, Stephanie, Asia, had any bidding words, last words of encouragement or affirmation that they would like to share.
Yeah, so as someone who grew up in the Christian church, one, I would say, just like Reverend Letitia says, start with yourself. There is a lot of unpacking that will need to be done, and recognize that there has been harm done to either you or folks within your community. And then I'm always going to tell people to hold on to hope, hold on to your faith, because humans are going to be humans. It doesn't excuse the hurt that they put on you, but we have to hold on to that faith and understand that it's so much bigger than the folks that are on this earth. And know that there are people, there are groups like the ones that we have here that are working and pushing on your behalf. So you do have a community. You will always have a community. And sometimes it's just about finding that pocket and staying there. So I just want people to leave encouraged and know that we are with you. And listen to the ones that aren't silent. Unfortunately, silence can be louder, but we have to go in and look to see for the folks that are speaking on our behalf.
Yeah. And to piggyback off of that, I would just say, one, you're not alone, and there's always someone out there that has either the same ideas or the same thoughts or have been in the same position as you. Um, Throughout my travels, I've met many different families, including myself, that had to pick up and start over in different places throughout the world. And it's always a matter of finding your tribe. So the world's a huge place, and social media and the digital world allows us to connect with people throughout the world.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much. Thank you all so much for lending your expertise, your energy, your knowledge, your time, and everything in between. Another place where you can actually get to know a lot of these Black maternal health, reproductive justice, and perinatal health organizations is at our Black Maternal Health Conference and Training Institute that is happening here in Atlanta, September 12th to the 14th. So please be sure to sign up for our e-newsletter to secure your registration for the conference this year. So in wrapping up, we just want to give our deepest appreciation and gratitude for our panelists, our speakers, and you all as our attendees for joining us for today's webinar, Faithful Advocacy, Faith Communities, and the Pursuit of Black Maternal Health and Reproductive Justice. For everyone that wants to get involved in BMMA's work and Black maternal health, definitely follow us across social media platforms, subscribe for our e-newsletters, and check out some local events that is happening with one of our partners in a community near you. Black Maternal Health Week is not over just yet. So if you still want to stay connected, check out our hashtag, which is hashtag BMHW24, as there might be a Black maternal health community events happening in your neighborhood. But until then, we thank you all and we wish you all a wonderful and impactful Black Maternal Health Week. Thank you all for joining today.